Welcome to Psych Health and Safety Canada podcast. And today I'm really thrilled to welcome Maya Volpato to the podcast. And Maya, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Thank you so much, Marianne, for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and to be part of this exciting conversation today. So my name is Maya Volpato. I'm a workplace mental health specialist, working predominantly in the corporate sector for the last more or less 10 years or so. And yeah, just enjoy working with teams and with leaders and helping them kind of mitigate some of the risks around psychological health and safety.
That's great. And Maya, when did you first learn the phrase even psychological health and safety? How did you go from mental health to that phrase?
Yeah, I think I would say roughly about, I would say maybe 8, 10 years ago, there was a fair bit of noise around the idea of how do we actually integrate and embed some of these best practices in workplace mental health within organizations. And that's when we started coming across, the work, the phenomenal work, which you were, of course, part of as well, with the standard, the Canadian standard for psychological health and safety, and looking at concrete risk factors that we could actually assess in the workplace. And that was really exciting because we were finally able to move from a place of talking about it from, kind of a more intellectual standpoint to one that was really very practical and strategic for organizations.
Yeah. Do you know, Maya, next year's 10 years since
It
that
is,
standard
eh?
was released?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we've got a group of people now are opening it up and looking at it compared to
good.
other things that have evolved since then and seeing how we can make it better. But also what we hear from people is don't make it bigger, just make
Right.
it better.
Yes,
So that's
because that
the
was definitely,
challenge.
yes, that was definitely one of the challenges we often heard from clients was, wow, having the capacity to implement it often meant needing to get some external support as well. So I'm happy to hear
So
that.
So I'm curious because I always have a response for that. What do you say to those who say it's too big, we can't do it? What's your
Mm.
advice?
So for me, this is a long-standing theory. I even did my thesis on this, but I strongly believe in small scale interventions, large scale impact, small steps. I think often we aim big. We see this as, this huge thing that we have to do, when in fact, there are so many bite-sized interventions, steps, that we could be doing that have a direct impact on the support that we're bringing to leaders and employees.
Yes. And so tell me some of those
Yeah.
s- smaller items that you would recommend.
Yeah, it always fascinates me to see, how a simple training around, workplace mental health, what is it? What does it look like? How do I know if, my employee is struggling? What do I do? How do I have that conversation? What are some of those important steps? It always surprises me at what point, managers are so thrilled, come out of these trainings feeling like finally, it's not this scary looking thing that I've kind of heard of, and wouldn't know from which end to grab. But in fact, there are ways, very practical and tangible ways for them to be able to detect and to respond. And so that's one small kind of example is training for leaders. They're experts often in their technical fields, but have little to no training in mental health or psychological health and safety. So it's really nice to see the impact that such a training would have, in the same way that it would for physical health and safety, right? You wouldn't necessarily know the hazards in a workplace unless we explain to you, this is how people can get injured. This is what you need to look out for. If someone does get injured, this is what you do. So we've done that for so many years in the physical space. It's just wonderful to bring about that added support and tools for leaders in that psychological space as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that so many people want to teach frontline leaders what psychosocial factors are and what's in the standard. And
Yeah.
what you're saying is what I believe is teach them how to do their job in a way that's comfortable for them instead of these broader theories, and because they want to have that impact.
Yeah,
Um,
and we know that today that's what's so meaningful to their role. We know that leaders are moving away from a transactional approach and want to be transformational, right? And so let's give them those concrete risk factors. Let's look at how do we mitigate them? How do we add some protective factors on the team? How do we have those conversations, those check-ins about these really difficult subjects?
so let's talk about that. What are some of the protective factors that leaders can look for and enhance?
Yeah, so I think, as we're currently knee deep in the transformation of work, and certainly the reorganization of work, probably more so than we've ever experienced in our lifetime. um, I think what we're seeing is that leaders will have to have immense flexibility as we move forward into a space of, hybrid work, for example. We know that folks are going to be facing major obstacles when it comes to that adaptation once again of something new, and moving them out of the kind of cocoon, that safety net that they've created for themselves in the last 2 years, and kind of pulling them out of that in hopes of creating collaboration and connection. So we know that flexibility is a huge one, and that comes with things like accommodations, right? That's coming from a perspective that the one size approach doesn't work anymore for everyone, that people are facing different realities, that you have family providers who are having to juggle taking care of their parents, aging parents, their children, while also wanting to do their job. So what does that look like for them? And then being mindful of that inclusion piece, which we know is such an important one, and realizing that the hybrid working model has the potential of creating a bit of a concerning dynamic, which is the us versus them, those that show up to the office and those that don't, those that have proximity to their leaders and those that don't. So flexibility, and really promoting accommodations when possible, I think is a really, really big one.
Yes, and as you say, thinking about inclusion, it's going to be more important now, with the hybrid models than it ever was before. Maya, you talk about a 4-step intervention model for leaders. So I always love the practical, like here's what you say, here's what you do. So can you
Yeah.
share your 4-step intervention model with us?
Sure. And it's not one that's specific to, let's say, mental health, which is kind of why I like it, because it's something that could be used in any check-in, right? So as a leader, you probably should be checking in on your employees right now, at least every 2 weeks, right? Any more than that in this space currently, it is far too long to get a sense of how people are actually doing. So that's kind of the first thing I would mention. But the 4-step model, and I've kind of coined the acronym, put mental health first. Always put mental health first. And that's 4 steps. So the first one being assess. So what are the red flags, right? We don't have to be clinicians to know that, an employee who, all of a sudden starts to be absent from really important meetings, or starts to be late, or, has a change in appearance, or is all of a sudden disengaged, or appearing, irritable or nervous, assessing, any kind of change that is marked and different. And then the second one is the P, and that's for planning. I think there is a certain level of planning that needs to be done before we actually sit down and speak about these very delicate issues with employees. And so I really encourage leaders to take a moment to really plan. So what is it that I've actually observed, so that it's not a personal attack, but I'm really talking about either a behavior or a performance issue, something that I've actually been able to observe. And how am I going to approach that? How long of a meeting do I need to have that conversation? Is that person someone who's more of a morning person, more of an afternoon person? I want to make sure that I have enough time. Maybe I don't schedule a back-to-back meeting in case, it becomes a bit of a much more difficult meeting. What resources do I want to have in my back pocket? Do I need coaching maybe as a manager, right? To have that difficult conversation. Maybe I need support because maybe there's something triggering. Maybe I've experienced something similar to that employee. And you know what? I'm concerned that I might not be able to have that conversation. So the planning piece is essential. The third one is the actual meeting. So, what does it look like to have those active listening skills, to have that presence, that posture of empathic leadership, of caring, of concern, and of support, right? That ability to say, this is what I've seen, and I'm concerned about you, and I want to support you. How can we work together and do that? And then, of course, the last one, which I don't think we do enough of as well, is the follow-up, right? So after we've had that meeting is, when can we meet again to see how it's going? So have we put a plan in place, and can we follow up on that? Maybe it's in a week, maybe it's in 2 weeks, depending on the situation. But following up and looking at, we've put together this plan that we felt might be able to support you. How are we doing on that? Is there anything additional that I could be doing to support you? So the follow-up is the fourth step. So assess, plan, meet, and follow up. So always put mental health first, being the acronym there.
Yeah, that's great, Maya. That's really helpful for people that just think, I don't know what to do. But what I get from folks is, but how do I approach them? Like, what do I say? What's your
Yeah.
advice there?
Yeah. And I think we need to focus on the observed changes, not on the person themselves, but, the observed changes, and to come in from an authentic and empathic stance. So, of course, that requires building trust and building relationships and building connection. And we know that in this current world right now, we are more connected in terms of back-to-back meetings, but also probably more disconnected than we've ever been. And so we need to work on building those relationships so that when we do approach someone and say, hey, I've noticed this in the last few weeks. I'm worried about you, that it's coming off from a place of genuine concern and good intention, and not from a place of judgment, or a place of kind of reproach.
Right. Or being blindsided because you've never asked me about
Absolutely.
myself before.
Exactly. And
And
you've
now
never
it's,
shared. Yeah. Yeah. So it's that ability, and that's something that we should be doing all the time. So every time we're checking in with our employees, hey, how's it going? And I think leaders have a really critical role to play in modeling that. So are you as a leader able to be authentic and speak about your own, without necessarily spilling over into kind of spilling over and crossing over boundaries, but are you able to say, yeah, I'm having a tough day today. It was a hard weekend. I'm going through some stuff at home and it's occupying my mind. Because when you do that as a leader, you give permission to others to also show up as their authentic self.
yeah, because often when we name those things, I'm going through a hard time, it's like releasing a pressure valve, and it's easier then to focus because you've named it. When you're afraid to speak out, it's different. Maya, earlier on, you mentioned something that caught my attention, and that idea that for those people who have been working from home for 2 years, it's like they're in a cocoon, not necessarily a great cocoon, but that
Right.
they're insulated from the workplace. What's your advice to employers who are bringing people back and want to do it in a psychologically safe way?
Yeah. So I mentioned, flexibility being a really big one. And then I think the second one is looking at what is the added value that you're actually bringing to the employee. So sort of like your clients, you have that reflection of, um, you know, is the product that I'm bringing to them of added value? Well, it's the same thing. What are you bringing to the employee experience that is going to drive them to want to come to the office? And right now, a big one is connection. right? But connection is something you can only work from the inside out. So you can't sell connection. You can't just put a bunch of foosball tables and apples and hope that, and a candy bar and hope that that's going to solve the issue. Connection is built from the inside out, and it requires people to put in the work, to be genuine, to be forefront. And so, if employees are asked to go back to the office and are just sitting behind their laptop from meeting to meeting, then what is the interest to them to go back? So how do we create meaningful relationships in the workplace? I think that's really the complex question that we need to be asking ourselves right now.
Well, it's been interesting talking to different organizations, because some of them are talking about whenever we have a meeting now, everybody will have a laptop, and then the people that are remote will be there. And so we still have that Zoom. But there's others who say, but then everybody misses out, right? The people that are there are missing out on the connection. The people that are there are missing out on, the side conversations. And some are saying that they don't quite have the answer yet. Have you got any suggestions for improving this?
I think what we are hearing as one potentially very effective and maybe very progressive solution is a bit of a combined approach where, folks are spending 2 to 3 days at home, and those 2 to 3 days at home are really spent not necessarily in meetings, not necessarily responding to emails all day, but really doing some of the harder work, getting into a state of flow, a state of being that requires little disruption, maybe some of the disruptions that we're used to facing in the office. While being in the office is a time for meaningful disruptions, connection, working collaboratively, working hands-on as teams, being in meetings together, brainstorming, doing some of that stuff that drives shared connection and meaning. But then while people are at home, let's not kind of try and reproduce that in a virtual way. Let's give people time to actually do the work, right? So that's one way that I'm hearing is quite progressive, and something that folks are looking at trying to put forward.
Yeah, it's ideal if everybody can come in on the same day, and if the teams are intact and not multidisciplinary where they're, all over the place. But I do think that just like we saw so much creativity in March 2020 when we had to figure it out, I think that as we return, we're going to keep seeing more creativity and learning from people. I just saw a policy that you can work from home, but you must be able to be in the office within 1 business day. And I thought, that's a weird rule, but I guess it's if I'm going to move to Costa Rica.
Right.
And then you say, well, I need you in the office tomorrow. And it's like, now I'll be 3 days before I can get a flight.
Yeah. And I think, that begs, I think the question of, do we need to all be doing the same thing? Or, does organizational culture, the kind of clients you have, the kind of employees that you have, does that kind of also drive what that solution looks like? For me, it's something that should be co-created. These are conversations that should not be, driven by the executive team in a closed office, but ideally should be, a dialogue and a conversation of what makes sense for organization. Right.
Which is a principle of the standard.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
That meaningful participation of employees.
Yeah.
Maya, you have a phrase that I'm curious about. You talk about the role of leaders' authentic excellence. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So authentic excellence is essentially a term that I've kind of started using to explain a posture, right? A posture that allows us to show up and to be seen for who we are. And I think as leaders, moving forward, certainly in what we're facing in this transformation of work, I think it's what allows them to unleash some of the greatness in themselves, and then consequently in others as well. And essentially, it's really, like I said before, it's living from the inside out, and leading with our hearts, because we know that moving forward, if we want to increase, connection, decrease isolation, be able to have meaningful conversations around people's well-being, we know that that can only done if people are coming from a genuine space of concern. So essentially, that authentic excellence is really just being able to touch in with ourselves, and show up as who we are. And of course, that drives inclusion, and that drives psychological safety, and it empowers everyone to bring their best to the table. So that's why I like to use the term excellence, because I truly believe that to connect with others, we have to connect with ourselves first.
And I agree. I say the first skill set that a leader needs is self-awareness. And your concept, authentic excellence, is really dealing with the issue. People say, well, bring your whole self to work, be authentic. But what if your whole self is negative, complaining, rude and obnoxious? So can you speak a little bit about how this concept can help manage that?
Yeah, I think so. We're working from a premise that every single one of us is inherently good. And that, as leaders, our goal should certainly be, as leaders, but also hopefully as employees, as individuals, our goal is to, continuously improve. We are a work in progress, as Will Smith kindly signed his apology. But yes, we are a work in progress. And I think starting from that premise, that's part of authenticity too, to be able to say, you know what, I was out of line yesterday. I'm sorry. Here's what I'm going to do moving forward to correct that. So it's dropping the idea of perfection, recognizing that we are all perfectly imperfect. And then from that premise, what am I willing to do to put in the work? How am I going to peel back some of the layers, some of the blockers that are standing in my way from me being able to put my best foot forward?
And how do you determine in a workplace what is acceptable behavior versus every person for themselves?
Yeah, and I think as organizations, I'd like to see us do a little bit more rigorous work around how we select, leadership capacities. We talk a lot about values in organizations. I haven't yet seen too many organizations that kind of look at how leadership is truly aligned and living out the values of the organization in a way that is meaningful, that is really walking the talk. And so I think we need to be evaluating that skill set. Certainly the technical skill set is an important one, but we need to be evaluating whether people are ready to take on those roles of posturing and of excellence. And again, it doesn't mean that they're perfect, but it means that they're willing to put in the work of kind of peeling back the layers that are in the way of them showing up in a way that drives other people to be their best self.
And so how would we measure that?
Yeah, I think I'm liking some of the things that we're seeing. So more and more we're stepping away from the old school performance management, very outdated 1 to 5 approach, and more what we're starting to see is conversations. So performance management shouldn't be something you're doing once a year, but something that you're doing all the time, right? In your check-ins with your employees. It shouldn't be a surprise to them that this is a concern, and that so and so feels that they've been hurt by one of your actions. Too often in the past, we avoided having these difficult conversations, and they would kind of just escalate and snowball. So I think that's a really great approach, is having those conversations, performance conversations, as part of a regular check-in. And then, of course, bringing in other people too. I think that whole 360 approach was brilliant. I haven't seen it really put forward in a way that's always tangible. I think capacity always becomes a bit of a challenge, and it gets pushed to the side. I think we need to bring that back as a main priority, so that, it's not just a supervisor and their employee having those performance conversations, but that it's being measured, by your colleagues, by your team, and that feedback essentially, feedback being a big one as a protective factor. But are we able to, do we have a culture at work where we're able to give each other feedback in a meaningful, respectful, and constructive way? How do we do that? Are we equipped? Have we been provided the tools? Do we know how to do that? Do we know how to receive it? So I think there's definitely some effort that could be put in that direction as well.
So it's a good point. Not only do we need the training, the knowledge, the skills to do meaningful feedback, but many leaders will say they need the time, and that they have a job, and managing people is just off the side of their desk because they have to do all of the work as well. So that becomes a challenge. Maya, I get accused all the time of being very practical because that's what people are saying, is that they want to know, so what do I do? What do I say? What's a question or questions that you would ask a leader to get at how they're doing in terms of psychologically safe leadership?
I think there's some really nice tools out there. One of the more recent one that I've come across is the psychologically safe leader assessment. So I think, and it doesn't have to be that tool, but that's certainly a great one. It's at no cost, but a leader who is truly interested in knowing, how am I doing in this area, might want to provide their employees with a link to an anonymous kind of questionnaire that assesses how they're doing, and where they might also have a difference of opinion. So the leader also gets to self-evaluate. And that's one of the things that I love about this tool, is I get to self-evaluate as leader. I think I'm doing great in this area, but my employees are all of a sudden saying, yeah, you're not doing that great. So there's that gray zone where we can start opening up a meaningful dialogue around my perception versus their perception. And from a place of practicality, I think that is one of the best tools that I've seen, certainly recently. Can't hear you anymore.
Okay, there you go.
There we go. Thank you.
It's interesting because with the psychologically safe leader assessment, we've just done 2 surveys, one where the leaders are rating themselves, and the other one where the employees rate the leaders. And there's a consistent gap between the two, but it is not because leaders are lying to themselves, but it's often that, in terms of, say, how I would respond if you were struggling, you might not know because you've never seen me do it with anyone, because it's confidential. And so part of that is helping the leaders to be able to learn and grow. And the nice thing about it is it measures the extent to which they do a strategy known to support psych health and safety, rather than a personality test or a popularity test, which some people have accused some 360s of that. And that in the end, you feel demotivated, like nobody likes me. Whereas with this, it's just, you're either doing it or you're not. And your employees either know you are or they don't. It's pretty straightforward that way.
It is. And it's so, it allows for such a rich conversation, that gray zone, of a difference of perception. It allows for really meaningful dialogue. And I think it gives leaders finally something concrete to say, yeah, this is going in my action plan. This is how I'm linking this to, my engagement survey as well. Right. So I just think it's a very, very powerful tool.
Yeah. Now you talked about workplace mental health trends, and you said
Yeah.
both good and bad.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, share a bit about that with us, Maya.
Yeah, so I think it's no surprise that, the pandemic has had a significant impact on mental health. We are seeing an important level of deterioration when it comes to anxiety. Certainly, burnout has taken a big hit. Um, there are the most vulnerable, of course, who are suffering. Women being one of those groups. It's of no surprise that across the globe, women still carry most of the caregiver responsibilities. So the pandemic has been really difficult in that sense, and it has driven record levels of burnout. And we're seeing burnout for the first time really across the organization, where once upon a time burnout was kind of something that was a little bit more reserved for employees. We're seeing it right up to the C-suite now. So there's no difference there, but we are seeing that it is impacting women a lot more. It is impacting, I think, the latest trends are saying 6 times harder those that are working more than 40 hours a week. And so, there has been some significant impacts. We're all facing a situation of chronic stress because, yeah, our brain is detecting that stressor that is the pandemic for now 2 years. So there's that fatigue that has set in for a lot of people. Almost 50, percent. I think we're at 47% of Canadians are feeling that exhaustion that has set in. So yeah, that pandemic brain, that brain fog is real. But I think there's a big silver lining, and I think we've seen it, in organizations, and also, we've seen it at the Olympics. We're seeing it in the NHL, and that's that. People are finally getting it. People are finally saying, you know what, enough is enough. I need to start putting my well-being first. And so for the first time, people are saying, what matters most to me is work-life balance. What matters most to me is my health, and starting to really commit to a practice of self-care. And so although we've been singing the song for many years now, I think the pandemic has given us the best business case we could have ever asked for in that sense.
Yeah, I've said more than once, Maya, that I wonder if I manifested the pandemic, because I wish that employers knew.
Get it.
Yeah, would get it. And now they are. And it's like, oh, well, I didn't mean that. But,
Right.
yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
still
if you don't
as
get it now, you never will. If
no.
this wasn't enough of a business case,
Yeah.
nothing will be.
How do you think we can sustain that
Mm.
idea of self-care, that idea of caring about the mental health of our employees? How can we sustain that now?
Yeah, I think we need to bring in some really strong practices around well-being, and we need to recognize that well-being is a shared responsibility more than ever. You can't outsource mental health. You can't just say, "Yeah, I've got an EAP, I got it covered. I've got telemedicine, I've got it covered." No, people spend the majority of their time at work, and you can't separate mental health. So their mental health comes to them at work every day, and their mental health will impact their performance at work, and their work will impact their mental health. So it's two directional in that sense. So I think there's that shared responsibility piece, and really committing to that. And then it's looking at what are the practices as an organization that we are willing to put forward, come together and put forward and want to commit to in service to our employees' well-being. And then as an employee, how am I, because I said shared responsibility. So employee, how am I going to put forward some practices that are going to ensure that I'm looking after myself? So am I able to take, several breaks during the day to walk away from my screen? Am I able to, get in a good walk and get outside, get out of my head and into my body, and just, disconnect? Am I, preserving my work-life balance, or am I sending emails and working till all hours of the evening? Am I isolating myself? Do I connect with loved ones, right? So I think from that shared responsibility model, we both need to commit to some strong practices of well-being, and check in, right? Check in
On each other as well as on our direct reports. I
Correct.
know Maya, when I burned out, there was nobody that could tell
Mm,
me that I should slow down, or I'm burning the candle at both ends, or I shouldn't be working. So there was nobody, because I felt, and I think this is part of the problem, is I felt like nobody else could do it. Everybody was depending on me, and I had to keep going. And so do you have any tips to get through to people like me, where it's not my boss, it's not
mm.
the work, it's not the employer, it's my own drive that made me not see what I was doing?
Yeah, that thanks for sharing. Yeah, that really resonates with my own experience of having had a burnout some 10 years ago. Um, but yeah, often we don't see it coming, and often burnout is described as just hitting a wall, because it's like, I thought I was, I could just push through, and there's a lot of not wanting to see the signs, wanting to push through. So I think with burnout, there's different risk factors. There's the personality ones. So of course, burnout often happens to people who are really passionate about their work, who really care, who want to put in their best effort and are detail oriented, and maybe don't want to kind of delegate, or don't want to seem like they're putting in their boundaries, maybe have some guilt around doing that. um, and so, I think we need to look at also the work risk factors. So again, shared responsibility model is, as an organization, are we promoting work-life balance, or is my leader sending, emails at all hours of the night? And so I'm feeling ashamed for not doing so. I'm feeling like I'm not pulling my weight because I'm not working 50 hours, 60 hours a week. Um, so I think we need to look at both of those. And when I said before, checking in, as an organization, and again as an individual, we're used to doing physical checkups, but we're never really taught on how to do mental health checkups all that much. And that's something that I think we need to really start doing, is, how am I doing? Taking a moment to sit in stillness and really truly ask myself, am I in a place where I'm thriving and I've got lots of energy, and, I'm seeing people, I have time for my hobbies after work? Or am I in a place, in that yellow zone, where I'm kind of more reacting, and I'm having a trouble sleeping on some nights? I'm, a little cynical at work. I've become kind of a little, frustrated and annoyed. So checking in, and it could be as simple as like a green, yellow, red. I like to use kind of a simple traffic light. Where am I at? And doing that regularly, so that I don't have to get to the point where I've hit the red light. And then, unfortunately, that preventative piece is a little too far behind.
Yeah, that you realize way too late that you're not enjoying life. You're just pushing yourself through, day after day,
Yeah,
waking up tired,
yeah,
going to bed tired. And yeah, it's something that we really do need to make part of regular
yeah,
observation about self, right?
yeah,
Which is
yeah,
what you said in the beginning, is that self-awareness for leaders, but self-awareness for all of us, is how
yeah.
we're going to determine the quality of our life. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think 10 years ago, people spoke about it a lot less. I think today, we're fortunate in some organizations where we are starting to have that open dialogue. So whether it's through, a group of mental health first aiders, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be leaders who are opening up about their experience and say, yeah, I had a burnout 5 years ago, and this is how it manifested itself. All of a sudden, you've, open up the room for anyone to kind of potentially come to you and say, yeah, you described that. I'm a little worried. I've noticed that sometimes I'm also feeling this. Let's chat about that.
Yeah. And that's exactly what you're saying, Maya, is that when it becomes part of the regular dialogue, how are you coping? What are your stressors? What do you need? Here's how I'm feeling. Then we normalize it, but we're also able then to prevent some of the worst situations, because people can see it. When
Yeah.
you experience burnout, did you see it coming? Were you saying no?
No, I was just in a performance mode. It was just like keep going, keep pushing. So certainly, I didn't have very healthy work-life balance. I was in a time in my life where my career was, the number one thing. I wanted to really shine. I wanted to prove myself at work, and that's how, for me, that's how I would do that. It was kind of to do more, or always look for better. And then there was some organizational factors where, my boss was physically distant, but also, emotionally distant. So we didn't have conversations around how are you doing. Everything was metric and performance based around numbers. So you become very wrapped into that world, and you completely dismiss the psychological being which drives that performance.
Yeah, it's funny now that I've been through it. When I've got people working for me, I refuse to let them work overtime. I say that if you think you need to work past 5 o'clock, then you have to come and talk to me about what's going on. When
Yeah.
I give them work, I say, what's on your plate? What do you have to move in order to take on this additional task?
Yeah.
And we have those conversations. But when it happened to me, I finally went into my boss and said, I can't work 6 or 7 days a week, 10 or 12 hours a day anymore. And he said, I never asked you to.
Exactly. And
And
so much of that is self-imposed.
yeah,
So much of that. More and more, that's what I'm hearing from leaders say, like, if you're working overtime, there's something wrong. Either I've mismanaged your workload, there's some blockers that we're not talking about. But more and more, leaders don't want that either.
well, because they don't want to have to deal with the burnout. They don't want
The
to have to deal
consequences,
with their
exactly.
people being off
Yeah.
because they allowed them to slide. And
Yeah.
that was my thing, is I want vibrant people. The way I described my burnout is extreme emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion.
Yeah.
And it was just dragging myself. I don't want employees like that. I want employees who are living their lives and enjoying their
Exactly.
work, and they're present. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're present in their personal life, right? They're
Yes.
thriving in their personal life, because you know very well that if they're thriving in their personal life, they're going to be thriving at work as well.
Yeah.
So that's such a critical component.
Yeah. But then the other thing, I guess, is that for some, they want to extract every ounce of work. Like when you were performing so high, your boss is benefiting from what you're doing. But if you step back and look at it, it's temporary. And so do you really want to squeeze everything out of somebody only for them to be off work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that you're also, in a space in your life where you're getting much of your joy, or much of your I wouldn't say joy, much of your satisfaction or sense of purpose from your work. So when you don't have those external factors in your life, and you're solely kind of getting that sense of pride from the work that you're putting out, then that continues to drive that reaction, right?
Mhm.
It
And what
becomes
I'm
like,
seeing now
yeah.
as people get older is that they will retire and they'll look around and they realize, I've never nurtured any relationships. I don't have hobbies. I don't have any
Exactly.
other interests. And it's like suddenly being released. So work should be, I still love my work. I still really enjoy it, but it is not the center of my universe.
It's not what defines you. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
hopefully, people are choosing work that they're passionate in and that's aligned with their values, because if there's that coherence, then that's also, we know, really beneficial to feeding our mental well-being. But the second you start kind of breaking that alignment and going against your values, right then and there, that's also going to be a huge risk factor as well.
So we call that moral injury, but do you want to talk some
Mm,
more about it, Maya? Because our nurses,
yeah,
our other first responders, grocery store clerks, taxi drivers, so many of them have had this experience of having their values, their boundaries violated because of the pandemic. Can you speak about what it is and how we notice.
Yeah. Yeah. So moral injury essentially, being that you're going into a profession or you go into a line of work because you feel driven by your sense of service to it. You have a certain, uh, you have certain values and ethics. And, for frontline workers, it's often because they want to be of help. They want to be caregivers or first aiders. And then you're within an organization that all of a sudden starts to introduce principles and practices that go against those values. So they might say, well, you have to see more patients per hour, and then of course that forces you to reduce the quality of the care that you're providing to those patients. So that goes against what you believe in, because you believe in quality of care, right? That's the reason you went into this. So when there's organizational practices that go against the grain of those values that are inherently very important to us and drive the reason why we go into the work that we do, that creates an incredible and a toxic level of disconnect, and the levels of stressors, and drives can drive anxiety, can drive burnout, and what we're seeing is there's a huge exodus in the healthcare field right now of practitioners just saying, yeah, no, this is not why I went into this field. I went into this because I care about my clients, and I want to be of support, and what we're introduced right now is going against that grain.
Mm-hmm. I had some nurses say to me that when they were, because they could have been fired for not following proper protection,
Yeah.
PPE,
Yep.
personal protection. And the idea that you would go into somebody who has a contagious disease and then use that same mask to go in and see somebody else, they would have been fired for it. And yet they were being told, we don't have enough supply, you have to do this. And
Right.
that idea that I'm at risk, I'm putting them at risk, this is not what I was hired for. So yeah,
Correct.
it's a big deal when we feel like our integrity, our values are being compromised. We really need to think about the damage it's going to do to us. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and I think more and more, sorry, I think more and more we're going to see that. I was reading about, Gen Z recently, Gen Z being, those that were born in 1996 up to 2000, who are either, just wrapping up university or entering or have been in the workforce for a couple of years now. They've grown up, unlike you and I, where this world of fake news and disinformation is very new. They've grown up into that. And so they're very in tuned and very acute at picking up the cues around things like, distrust, inauthenticity, like a unalignment around the kind of values that you stipulated as an organization, and those that you actually promote. So they're able to pick up in very subtle cues, are you actually walking the talk?
yeah, and call us on it, right? Which is,
Yeah.
for some leaders, I think that's unnerving. For me, I think it's refreshing
It
because,
is.
yeah, let's look at it. Let's
Yeah.
consider, is that inauthentic, or is my behavior just not showing what I'm really thinking, and can I change that? Yeah.
Mm.
I can't believe that we're running out of time. I have another question that I want to ask you, but before I do, are there other tips, strategies, points that you'd really like to get across to people around all of these topics that we discussed?
I think right now the big message is self-care that's coming through, whether you're a leader, an employee, whether you're not working and you're a caregiver principally, whether you're doing both, all of those. I think we're at a critical time where we have to commit to doing that self-care. And it's got to be in those small practical ways, right? We're not in a space where we want to be adding to our to-do list, but it's really looking at, are there ways that I can just shift? So, my meetings that are an hour, can I cut them down to 50 minutes so that I can just walk away for 10 minutes and rest my eyes or get outside? Am I ensuring that, my lunch breaks are a moment that brings me joy and brings me disconnection? So I think there are subtle ways, and I think we need to really be committing to that. I think the next couple of years are going to be really tough for our leaders as we enter the transformation of work as we know it. And so I think that's essentially what's going to be able to pull us through. And of course, our connection. So our ability to have meaningful conversations around these topics.
That's great. Thanks for that, Maya. So here's my final question, is if you were describing a psychologically healthy and safe workplace to somebody who has no idea what that concept means, how would you describe it in plain language so they get the feeling of, oh, that's what it is?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way it looks is a place where you can show up as your true self, right? You don't have to worry about putting on a mask. You can show up and be seen for who you are. The space is one where it's collaborative. People can exchange. We can have differences of opinion and talk about those. We don't sweep them under the rug. We're able to call out when things are heavy or feel mismanaged. There's an open dialogue. There's an important preservation of work-life balance. We believe that people have lives outside of work, and we appreciate and want them to enjoy themselves outside of their work time. And we ensure that, as leaders and as colleagues, we create an environment where people can actually do that, where it's feasible, an environment where, we accept and normalize that there are times in our life that we're just not feeling okay, and that's okay. And we bring support to those people, whether we're colleagues or leaders. We're able to be there and lend an ear. And that's not to be clinicians, but simply to listen and to reach out and to refer to professional resources. And so, we recognize that those factors is what drives people to be engaged. It's what drives people to be able to collaborate, to be able to innovate, because the risk of failure is understood and it's accepted, and it's a safe place where you can try things. And then from that, we recognize that that's really how you generate productivity and, more important, performance and optimal experiences for employees.
That's great. So it really is a good business decision. It's not about just being nice for the sake of being nice.
It's really not. It's really not. It makes really great business sense, and it affects the bottom line directly. You can't have performance, you can't have productivity and engagement and collaboration if you don't have psychological health and safety.
That's great. Thank you so much, Maya, for your time today and for all the wisdom that you've shared. This podcast will be on psychealthandsafetycanada.com. It'll also be on the Flourish DX YouTube channel, and I will tag you on LinkedIn when it comes out so that you'll know about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marianne. It's wonderful to see you. And it's so great to be part of this important conversation.
Thanks, Maya.